I've tried therapy and self-development for years.
Hmm.
Why do I still feel stuck? I understand things intellectually, but I don't experience them differently.
I've heard this so many times. Honestly, I've felt it.
That quote, that's exactly where we're starting today. And if that specific feeling resonates with you, if you've ever just sat in that exact space of quiet, really isolating frustration, you are exactly who we're speaking to in this deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, we are unpacking an incredibly perceptive piece of writing by Har titled You're Not Stuck. You're Running on Empty. And our mission right now is to just tear down the illusion that your lack of progress is like some sort of character flaw.
Right, because it's not.
It's really not. We're looking at the structural reality of why nothing you've tried has worked and why the problem was actually never you. This is not about trying harder. We are entirely past the concept of trying harder.
We have to be past it. Because the people experiencing this, they are already trying harder than anyone else. I mean, the premise here is that we're talking to educated, self-aware individuals who have read the books, they've listened to the lectures, they've done the work.
Right, they know the theories.
Exactly. They understand the mechanics of growth intellectually. They can explain these concepts to their friends perfectly. But there is this massive, agonizing disconnect between that intellectual understanding and their actual lived reality.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the invisible architecture of why that failure happens. And the piece argues that it comes down to a very specific missing element, an element most of us aren't even looking for.
To understand what's missing, though, we
Yeah.
first have to map out what's currently happening. The author calls this the loop.
The loop, yeah.
It's this exhausting, invisible cycle that most growth-oriented people know intimately. It usually starts when you hit a wall. You feel sort of foggy or disconnected or just stalled out in your career or personal life.
And because you're a proactive person, you don't just sit there.
Right. You look for answers, you consume a piece of content, a new book, a new framework, a new philosophy, and suddenly it clicks. You get this massive surge of clarity.
Light bulb moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you start the new protocol. Day one is fantastic. You are energized. You wake up early. You feel like, you finally cracked the code.
And day two still works. You're running on the momentum of that initial revelation.
But then we hit the biological reality of time.
Right.
By day 3 or day 4, the energy fades. The world intervenes.
Always does.
Yeah, work gets chaotic, a family emergency happens, or you just wake up profoundly tired. The spark of motivation is still there, faintly, but the sheer force of willpower required to execute the new system has just skyrocketed.
Well, let's look at the actual neuroscience of what is happening here, because it's not a moral failure. When you first consume that content, your brain experiences a dopamine spike. But dopamine isn't just about pleasure. It's about reward prediction error. It's an anticipatory chemical. Your brain is essentially fronting you an energy loan based on the anticipation of a tangible result.
So it's essentially saying, okay, I'll give you the energy to wake up at 5 a.m. because I believe this new system is going to yield a high return.
Precisely. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism. But by day 4, your brain does an audit. It looks around your environment for a return on that energy investment.
And what does it find?
Well, without something concrete holding your place, without any visible proof that what you are doing is actually altering your reality, your brain assesses the situation and categorizes it as a bad investment.
So the system just crashes.
It crashes. You stop. Not because you are weak, but because to continue expending heavy cognitive effort without any proof of return would actually be biologically irrational. Your brain literally cuts off the funding.
Wait, I have to stop you there and just make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Because if I accept that, it means I have to throw out the last 5 years of how I've judged my own work ethic.
I know. It's a huge shift.
Are we really saying that dropping a habit on day 4 isn't a discipline issue? Because my whole life I've been told that day 4 is where the winners are separated from the losers. That you're supposed to just push through the friction.
The idea that you should indefinitely push through friction without receiving any tangible feedback is a modern invention, and it completely goes against our fundamental wiring.
How so?
Well, think about early human survival. If you expend massive caloric energy hunting in a specific forest for 4 days and you find absolutely no food, no tracks, no proof that animals are even there.
You leave the forest.
Exactly. The winner isn't the guy who stubbornly starves to death in that forest just to prove he has grit. The winner is the one who says, there is no proof here, and rationally redirects his energy elsewhere.
Wow.
Your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's being rational. There's no proof, so it stops.
It makes me think of plugging in a new appliance. Say you buy a new television. You plug it into the outlet, you hit the power button, and if the light doesn't turn on, you unplug it. You check the breaker. You try another outlet.
Right.
What you absolutely do not do is sit there staring at a blank screen, intensely concentrating, hoping that through sheer willpower and moral fortitude, the television will eventually turn on.
No, you look crazy.
Right. You recognize immediately that the circuit is broken. There is no power. But when it comes to our own development, we are told to just stare harder at the blank screen. We blame ourselves for the light not coming on.
It's a brilliant analogy because it removes the emotion. When the TV doesn't turn on, you don't call the TV lazy.
Yeah.
You don't say the TV lacks discipline. You look for the missing connection.
Hmm.
But we don't extend that grace to our own psychology. And the emotional toll of this perfectly rational brain function is devastating when it plays out over years.
Because you're caught in a cycle of continuous effort and continuous collapse.
Exactly. You find the next framework, you restart the exact same cycle, you fail again, and the weight of that compounds.
Which perfectly explains this heavy, almost indescribable exhaustion that the article dives into next. The author calls this state being soul-tired.
Soul-tired, yeah.
And if our brains are logically shutting down effort because there's no proof, yet we keep forcing ourselves to restart these engines, the resulting friction is going to literally tear the machine apart.
Soul-tired is entirely distinct from standard fatigue. We really need to draw a hard line here.
Okay, what's the distinction?
This is not physical exhaustion. You cannot cure this by sleeping for 12 hours on a Saturday or taking a week off to go to the beach. And it is not workplace burnout, which is usually a symptom of volume having too many emails, too many tasks, and not enough hours.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Soul-tired is the specific, heavy existential fatigue that comes from trying incredibly hard over a sustained period of time and seeing zero evidence of change. It is the crushing weight of perpetual motion with absolutely no displacement.
The author pulled actual quotes from anonymous forums where people talk about this. These are the conversations happening in the middle of the night when the performative hustle culture facade drops away. I'm going to read 3 of these quotes slowly, directly from the text.
Go ahead.
I really feel like this whole process has mentally fried me. I feel like a shell of myself.
That phrase mentally fried me. It points directly to the sheer cognitive overload we were just talking about. It's an electrical failure.
Yeah.
Managing an internal state, constantly monitoring your thoughts, trying to optimize your routine, trying to force motivation. It takes an unbelievable amount of RAM in your brain. When you do that for years without any external validation to offset the cost, you literally fry your own circuitry.
It's just devastating. Here's the second one. I've become an alien in my own life. I'm tired of being the lone ghost at every dinner table.
The isolation there is just profound. You're sitting at a table with people you love, maybe eating a normal Tuesday night dinner, but you are completely detached.
Because you're trapped in your own head.
Exactly. Your entire internal world is consumed by this silent, invisible struggle to fix yourself. You're constantly analyzing what you did wrong that day, planning the framework for tomorrow, and nobody else can see the effort. Nobody else can see the failure.
You feel like a ghost.
Right. You feel like a ghost because you are moving through the world, expending massive energy, but nothing you are doing is leaving a physical footprint.
It's heartbreaking. And the last quote, I'm redlining my engine just to stay in the same place.
These aren't people who gave up. That is the most crucial takeaway of this entire deep dive. Look at the language, redlining my engine, mentally fried.
They're trying so hard.
These are people who stayed committed longer than most. They pushed through the initial resistance. They woke up earlier. They added more practices to their morning routines. They bought the heavier planners.
Yeah, they did everything they were supposed to do.
They kept the engine revving at maximum capacity, burning through their own psychology, and they still ended up in the exact same place. Effort without the right feedback eventually and inevitably collapses. It is a structural certainty.
So if all these smart, dedicated, hardworking people are redlining their engines and going nowhere, then the tools that are being given must be fundamentally flawed.
Completely.
Because if our biology demands proof, why are we constantly being handed tools that offer none? It feels like the entire self-improvement industry is actively fighting against our fundamental biology.
It is. Because the industry, by and large, is designed to produce a feeling, not to produce proof.
A feeling.
Yes. The entire ecosystem of self-development is structured around the sensation of discovery. When you read a profound book or you listen to an incredibly articulate speaker dissect a problem you've been having, your brain releases a surge of neurotransmitters.
Yeah, it makes you feel like you did something.
Exactly. It simulates the feeling of having actually solved the problem. It feels incredibly useful. You feel equipped. But what the text points out so sharply is that this is a biological trick.
Right.
The brain registers the signal of progress from consuming the content, but the system demands no actual output.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on this because I feel like we're painting with a really broad brush here. What about the active tools the industry gives you?
Like what?
Like, isn't journaling valuable? I spend 20 minutes journaling every single morning. I have stacks of notebooks. My hand physically cramps from writing.
Aye.
Are you telling me that's just a feeling? Because that feels like real, undeniable work to me. I am producing pages.
It can be valuable,
Yeah.
but it's not proof. There's a massive structural difference between processing and producing.
Unpack that. Processing versus producing. Because to me, writing a journal entry feels like producing a physical thing.
I get that. But think of processing as moving the dirt around in the exact same hole. You're sweating, you're digging, your muscles are burning. The effort is very real. And sometimes you need to dig to understand what's buried. But at the end of the day, when you step out of the hole and look at the landscape hasn't changed.
Wow.
A journal entry about your internal state, about your frustrations or your goals for the day, is a reflection. It is an echo of your internal weather. It is not an artifact of forward movement in the external world.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the same logic applies to planning. Planning feels like massive action. You buy the massive whiteboard, you color code the calendar, you block out your hours. It feels like you are commanding your life.
Oh, I know that feeling intimately.
Right. But when the day is over and you look around the room for what actually exists in the real world that did not exist before you woke up, the answer is usually nothing.
Yeah. I remember buying this massive, expensive leather-bound planner. I loved the smell of the paper. I bought specific pens for it. On Sunday night, I spent 3 hours mapping out my week, color-coding my workouts, my deep work blocks, my reading time.
And you felt great.
I felt like a completely new, highly effective human being. And by Wednesday afternoon, when a client called with a crisis and my color-coded blocks went out the window, the planner just became a source of guilt.
Because it wasn't proof of action.
Exactly. I had a beautifully organized map of a place I hadn't traveled to. It's the illusion of action. You spend all this time optimizing the vehicle, polishing the dashboard, checking the tire pressure, but you never actually put the car in drive and move to a new coordinate.
And because you are exhausted from all the maintenance, you think you've driven 500 miles.
Precisely. And that exhaustion is very real, but it is unrewarded by reality. You did the maintenance, but you didn't generate any mileage.
And the author distills this failure of the industry into one devastating reality. Every system failed at the same point. It asked you to keep going without giving you evidence that continuing was worth it.
Which leads us to the absolute intellectual core of this entire text. If the problem isn't your willpower, and the problem isn't your intelligence, and the problem isn't that you haven't bought the right planner, what is the actual name for the void you are falling into?
The text gives it a very specific structural name.
Yeah, what was it?
It is called the proof deficit. This is the ultimate reframe. If you are listening to this and you have spent years labeling yourself as lazy, undisciplined, or incapable of follow-through, you need to discard that label right now.
Right now.
You do not have a discipline problem, you have a proof deficit.
A proof deficit. That changes the entire landscape. Because if it's a deficit of proof, it means consistency isn't a personality trait.
Exactly. We have been sold this myth that consistency is a virtue, a genetic lottery ticket, or a moral high ground.
Right, like some people just have it and some don't.
We look at people who show up every day, the prolific writers, the engineers who ship code relentlessly, the people who build successful businesses, and we assume they possess an iron will that we lack.
We think they're superhuman.
We assume they wake up every day fighting a war against their own nature, and they just win that war because they are morally superior. But consistency is merely the natural output of a system that generates enough visible evidence to justify continuing.
So it's a feedback loop.
Yes. When you see proof, you continue rationally. When you don't, you stop also rationally.
So the people we perceive as hyper-disciplined aren't necessarily gritting their teeth through misery every single day. They have just locked themselves into a system that constantly feeds them proof.
Exactly.
They write a page of a manuscript, and at the end of the day, that page exists. They build a feature in an app, and the feature functions, the proof sustains the action, not their morality.
Yes, they aren't running on willpower, they are running on evidence. But when you are trapped in a proof deficit, when you are constantly generating effort that vanishes into the ether, the psychological damage goes far beyond just not reaching your goals.
The damage is cumulative,
It really is.
and that damage is terrifying. There is a quote from the piece that perfectly captures the end stage of this cycle. I'm going to read this and just let it sit for a second. I don't trust myself to follow through anymore.
That is the breaking point. The text argues that the real damage of the loop isn't the wasted time. It isn't the money spent on books or the abandoned templates. The deepest, most corrosive damage is the complete erosion of self-trust.
Because every time you restart, you make a promise to yourself. You sit on the edge of your bed on a Sunday night, and you say, this time it will be different. This time I'm going to stick to it.
And when it isn't different because the structural lack of proof guarantees it won't be different, you don't blame the structure.
You blame yourself.
You blame yourself. Every single restart, every failed promise adds a microscopic layer of quiet shame. It's insidious because it happens entirely in your own head. Nobody else hears you make the promise, so nobody else knows you broke it.
But your brain knows.
Your brain knows. Over years, those microscopic layers of shame calcify. You reach a point where your own word means absolutely nothing to your own brain. When you tell yourself, I'm going to start doing this tomorrow, your brain instantly categorizes it as a lie.
Wow.
You stop believing yourself. And trying to build a life on a foundation of zero self-trust is like trying to build a house on sand while a hurricane is hitting.
It is a structural failure internalized as a character flaw. You look in the mirror and you see a flake, an imposter, someone who talks a big game and never delivers.
But that's not what you are.
Right. What you actually are is someone operating a machine with a severed feedback cable. You are pushing the levers, the gears are turning, the engine is redlining, but the cable isn't connected to the outcome.
It's tragic, honestly.
So let's talk about the literal quantifiable cost of this severed cable. Let's look at the hidden cost of the proof deficit, because it isn't just an emotional tax. It drains your most finite resource time.
Let's run the calculation out loud together because the math is sobering and it explains why you feel like you have no time despite working all day.
Okay, let's do it.
Think about what happens every single time you start over after abandoning a system. The text points out that 20 to 30 minutes of reconstruction per session are just gone.
The reconstructive tax. I want to dive into the mechanics of this. It's like comparing your brain to a computer's RAM versus its hard drive.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. When you are working consistently on something, the context is loaded into your RAM, your working memory. It's instantly accessible. But when you abandon a project for 2 weeks because your system crashed, that context gets dumped from the RAM.
You lose your place.
Exactly. When you finally muster the willpower to sit back down, you can't just pick up where you left off. You have to boot up the hard drive, find the old files, and painstakingly load them back into your working memory.
You sit down, and before you can even take a single step forward, you have to figure out where you left off. You are hunting through old folders. You are rereading your own notes from 3 weeks ago, trying to decipher your own shorthand, trying to recapture the context of your own thoughts.
What was I trying to do here? What was the next step?
You are excavating your own abandoned construction site.
And by the time you finally load all that context back into your RAM, 30 minutes have passed. Your cognitive battery is already depleted, and you haven't even done any actual work yet.
So let's say you lose 20 to 30 minutes to reconstruction every time you try to engage with your work. If you do that 4 or 5 times across a week, that is 2 to 3 hours entirely gone, vaporized into pure friction.
And if we scale that out across a month, a full workday is lost. 8 to 10 solid hours, completely gone.
And you didn't lose that time to bad decisions.
Right, you didn't lose it to scrolling on your phone or watching television. You lost an entire workday simply to the absence of continuity.
But that is just the temporal cost. The deeper cost, the one that really anchors you in that feeling of being stuck, is what happens to the actions themselves.
What do you mean?
When you operate in a cycle of starting and stopping without generating proof, your actions don't compound. They stay isolated. You exert a massive amount of effort on a Tuesday. You write half a blog post, or you sketch half a wireframe. You drop it. You exert massive effort 2 weeks later on a Thursday. You read 3 chapters of a book on coding. Those 2 efforts never speak to each other. They do not stack. There is no record. There is no trail.
Which brings us to what I think is the most penetrating line in the entire article. That gap between who you know you could be and who you see in the mirror grows not because you're not trying, but because your trying produces no record.
It produces no record. If you have no record of your existence, of your effort, you are functionally invisible to yourself. That gap you feel, the agonizing, silent distance between your potential and your reality, is purely a documentation problem.
Because you know you have the horsepower. You feel the engine running.
But without a record of the miles driven, you feel like you haven't moved an inch.
So how do we fix the machine? How do we reconnect the feedback cable so the engine actually moves the car? We need to shift into what it looks like when this is actually fixed.
Yes, let's get into the structure.
And I want to be very clear with everyone listening. We are not shifting into optimism here. We are not going to offer you a new morning routine or a mantra or a fresh burst of motivation. We are shifting entirely to structural reality.
Optimism is fundamentally unhelpful here. Motivation is unhelpful. What is helpful is physics, cause and effect. If the absence of proof is the disease, the relentless production of proof is the cure.
Right.
The structural fix hinges on a single, non-negotiable mechanism, the artifact.
One visible artifact per session. That is the rule. When you sit down to engage with whatever it is you are trying to build, change, or learn, the session does not end with a feeling. It does not end with a profound reflection.
No.
It must end with something that physically or digitally exists in the real world that did not exist before you sat down.
It has to be concrete. And this scales across any discipline. If you are a writer, an artifact is a published post or a finalized, exported document of 500 words. Not a brain dump of ideas, but a finished piece.
If you're a coder, it's a committed piece of code that actually runs.
Exactly. If you are a parent trying to organize a chaotic household, it's a physically cleared and reorganized pantry, not a list of organizational supplies you plan to buy.
It has to be something you can point your finger at and say, that is what I traded my time for, because that artifact is proof.
And I want to talk about the friction of day one under this new system, because creating an artifact is harder than processing. Journaling about wanting to write an article is easy. Actually writing and publishing a terrible, imperfect 300-word article is incredibly uncomfortable.
Oh, your ego is going to fight it.
Your ego will scream at you. It will tell you the artifact isn't good enough. It will tell you to go back to planning, because planning is safe.
But you have to push through that specific friction.
You do, because that artifact triggers the chain reaction we have been missing. Proof is feedback. It is the clearest, most undeniable feedback in the world. When your brain sees that artifact, even if it's ugly, even if it's imperfect, it receives the exact signal it has been starving for.
The feedback tells the brain, keep going.
The energy expenditure was worth it. We have something to show for it.
So let's look at how this compounds. You endure the friction on Monday. You produce one artifact.
Yeah.
On Tuesday, you sit down, and instead of having to reconstruct your motivation from scratch, you look at Monday's artifact.
It exists. It's proof.
You produce a second artifact. By Friday, after 5 days, you don't just have 5 isolated efforts floating in the ether, you have 5 data points.
And 5 data points create a pattern. This is where the magic happens, structurally speaking. A pattern is undeniable evidence of consistency. It is outside of your feelings. It exists whether you feel motivated or not.
Right. If you wake up on Saturday feeling completely exhausted, foggy, and soul-tired, the 5 artifacts still exist.
Your feelings cannot unpublish the posts. Your feelings cannot unwrite the code. And evidence of consistency simply won't break when your initial enthusiasm fades. Your brain doesn't need enthusiasm anymore. It has data.
This shifts the entire burden of growth off of your shoulders and onto the system. You don't have to carry the heavy, exhausting weight of trusting yourself anymore. You just let the artifacts do the talking. You let the proof carry the weight.
I want to read the author's description of this exact transition because it perfectly encapsulates what we are aiming for here.
Please do.
The shift isn't dramatic. It comes as a quiet accumulation, one proof at a time, until you look back and realize you don't distrust yourself anymore. Not because you decided to, because the evidence made the case.
Because the evidence made the case.
Yeah.
You didn't argue yourself out of your shame. You didn't affirm your way into self-trust by looking in the mirror and repeating positive phrases.
No, you simply presented your brain with a stack of undeniable evidence, and the brain had no choice but to change its verdict.
That is the ultimate liberation. You are no longer fighting your own mind. You are feeding it exactly what it needs to allow you to move forward. If you recognized yourself anywhere here, that recognition is the starting point.
The article points to something specific at the end, not a philosophy. An actual structure you can run today, In 10 minutes, that ends with one piece of visible proof. That's where the loop breaks.
The link is in the description. It takes 10 minutes. The only thing it asks you to produce is one thing that exists when you're done.
Consider this. What if your biggest flaw isn't a lack of willpower, but a surplus of patience for systems that give you absolutely nothing back?
The loop breaks the moment you produce something visible.